I thought I would offer a video that is a little bit about mapping the mind. I find it really useful to have a really detailed map of the mind, because if you've got a really detailed map, you can navigate your way around better. Not perfectly, but much better. And so I thought I would offer a bit of an idea of how I have mapped things, because it might be helpful to you. And if not, then, what are you going to do? Anyway, because I think in pictures and that helps me to understand things. Imagine that let's take for instance the pandemic. Imagine that that's like a forest. It's a forest of ideas. And there are like 5 big trees in this forest. And each of the trees represents a core idea. And if you're in a scary forest, if the way that you're thinking about all of the pandemic stuff, all of the COVID stuff, is in a fear-based way, then each of those core ideas would be fear-based. They would be anxiety-provoking. They would potentially be depressing. That, people are going to be dying, and that's tragic and terrible, and so that becomes sort of one of the core ideas. Death becomes one of the core ideas. Well, if you think about it as a tree, one of sort of the main trees within this forest, that tree has branches that gives birth to, a dozen different ideas sprout off of that single core idea. And that's why people often feel like they can get stuck in their mind in a way that's almost impossible to sort of navigate your way out of, because you end up moving from one sort of big core base idea that has 100 different ideas sprouting off of it, like death. Every day I check the news and more people have died. The risk of people that I love dying. I went to the supermarket and somebody sneezed in my direction, and that sort of triggers that idea. And then when I came home, I heard on the radio when I was driving home that there's been a breakout in my area. And it's like that single idea of death, which is obviously one of the huge ones, one of the big core ideas in the scary, deep, dark forest that is life. That has 100 ways that can shoot off. And that's just one of the ideas. Another one of the ideas might be health, that, they're introducing vaccines. We need to make sure that we're eating better. How can I eat better when the supermarket shelves aren't stocked? What do I need to, maybe I should be taking more multivitamins. So that single big idea then has the potential to sprout off 100 different ideas and give birth and grow 100 different ideas. So what ends up happening is that your mind just sort of meanders around in this forest, moving from one massive scary idea to another massive scary idea, and is fairly undefended with all of that. And it can, I think for a lot of people, it can feel like that you just end up being lost in this sort of labyrinth of ideas, not knowing how to find your way out. And particularly with a really complex issue, there are more of those trees, if that kind of makes sense. So an issue that you can handle that's still scary and challenging is like a smaller forest. It's got some really big core basic ideas that will still give birth to, all sorts of other ideas off of that sort of core trunk. But something like this is really hard to navigate through. So the way that you can help with that actually needs to be quite an active process in order to get on top of things that the mind is fairly undefended about. It's almost like you have to build up your defenses. And you do that in the same way that fear works. If you think of it as like the structure of fear being like that forest with the big trees that give birth to all of the, you know, other sort of secondary ideas, if you like. Well, we can then create a similar forest that, and you have to forgive that I'm sort of flogging this metaphor to death, but a similar forest that is a peaceful forest, that is a forest of confidence or capability, feeling capable to be able to handle it. So let me draw it because it might make a bit more sense. My very high tech, and it's going to be backwards, I think, to you guys, so I apologize for that, but you'll get the idea. Let's say that in order to respond to this scary forest that the mind does on its own, you don't have to do anything about the scary forest. It's kind of the default mode of the mind of, holy shit, there's like 10 massive ideas that are then shooting off 100 in each of those ideas. All right, so let's, and this is just one metaphor for this, but the active process of almost like planting a different forest is trees, yes. So if we were going to try and find some core ideas that served confidence or that served peacefulness, they have to, first of all, start out being fairly big, kind of meaty ideas that will help us to then, you know, find some additional ideas that sprout off of those core ones. So let's say health is one of them. Ironically, health is also part of the scary forest, but we can potentially sort of commandeer that idea and make it part of the forest that we're planting and we're going to be nurturing and we're going to be growing. So let's say health is one of them. Often, yeah, is that backwards? Anyway. Another one of the ideas that we can maybe anchor into, that we can, you know, we can find shade under, we can help, one of the ideas that could potentially protect us is actually, ironically, the idea of the unknown. So I'm going to put that one down. All right, and the more of these big meaty ideas you can find, the better. One of the other ideas that would sort of serve us would maybe be something like faith or trust. And what you'll find is often these big, really powerful, helpful ideas are actually the same in a lot of different circumstances that you've found yourself in. We can anchor into, and that's why cliches become cliches. That's why truisms are what they are, because it's this sort of generational wisdom that we have. So something like faith is probably a big one for a lot of people. And then there would maybe be another one. What would another one be? It would potentially be something like strength or competency. So I'll put strength. Okay. So the way this works, like I say, structure the same. So fear and confidence work in exactly the same way, just in different directions. So that's why I think understanding the structure can be really helpful, because then you can work with this template and then use that to sort of be able to nurture a more helpful, productive way of thinking about the situation. So let's say something like health. If you were going to be deliberately holding your mind and nurturing the idea of health, and seeing what other ideas can sprout from that. It might be something like, I'm a healthy person, I've made sure that I've kept myself healthy, I can be improving my health at this time, there are things that I could be doing to boost my immunity. So that would kind of be the health idea. You can feel how each of those ideas has that core structure about it. Those ideas all sprout from that core idea of health. Something like strength would be, I've dealt with difficult situations before. I'm a strong person and I've brought resilience to things in my life previously. This is a difficult thing to be experiencing, but I've experienced worse, or I've experienced things that are just as complex as this, and I've worked my way through. I remember that it was difficult at that time, but I'm a capable person, I can find the information that I need to find, and I'll be able to get through this. That's kind of the ideas that are all, shooting forth from that core idea of strength. The idea of the unknown, which is a massively helpful idea to often anchor into in times of struggle or uncertainty, is that, life always entails the unknown. I'm always, having to be confronted by the unknown. This situation isn't unusual in that regard. And I have responded to other situations where I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And I needed to just step forward in strength, in courage, and just had to trust, I had to have faith that I would work my way through it. Faith or trust is, it might be for you that the universe has my back, or, even just I trust in myself that I'm going to be able to handle things, or things work out for the better, or there's always a silver lining, or the glass is half full. So what happens is, often in a really complicated problem that people are trying to sort of fortify themselves against, or have some kind of defense against a really complex, scary problem, is that people will often come up with one idea. So it's like you've planted one of those trees, and then you're working your ass off to nurture and try and grow that one. But it's not enough. You have to have as many of these core, strong ideas as you can. And then really try and put some deliberate thought into, how could I be nurturing, or how could I be growing the idea of health? So, and sometimes that can be really helpful in talking to other people who seem to be coping, because what you'll hear from them is that they're anchoring into certain big ideas, and they might have additional ideas that you can then borrow. Obviously, it has to feel true for you. It has to resonate for you. But that's, I think, a way of thinking about it. Or even if you are finding that you're thinking a lot about, something like the pandemic, which is completely understandable, just letting your mind run means that you will actually be, without meaning to, you end up nurturing the trees in the scary forest. You end up tending to and fertilizing and growing the trees that are in the, scary fucking forest. Whereas if you can come out of there, find a clearing, start planting some really helpful ideas and then tending to those and nurturing those, then your thought becomes a bit more helpful and you've got a little bit of balance. Hopefully that makes sense to you. It's sort of a fairly complex idea and difficult to convey without, you saying to me, stop, I'm confused. What do you mean by all of that? So hopefully that kind of makes sense. And hopefully that's been of help. All right, see you next time.